Morning everybody. So this is a video on techniques for your narrative writing. So that is English language component 1. We are focusing specifically on the Eduqas exam board, which if you do Eduqas and you've watched my other video on the narrative writing, you will know is very different from other exam boards. And while you are going to be using some techniques, some figurative or literary techniques in your writing, you don't need as many as are encouraged by other exam boards, for example AQA. So we're going to focus on these three techniques, personification, simile and allusion. And the reason for that is that it is, with Eduqas, a handful of well-crafted techniques is way better than 50 rubbish similes. And so we're going to focus on where you've done those little bits of pre-planning for the elements of your story, like your main character. We are going to focus on how you could use some of these techniques to elevate the key bits of your narrative. So let's start off with personification. It's one that we know really well. It's when we give human attributes to something that is inanimate. And you've got some examples on the screen here and another example here. We've got one word or more than one word that creates personification. However, the way that you create personification and what you personify is important. So for personification, you are choosing something inanimate, which means it can't be your main character. You can use similes and metaphors for your main character. So then you're probably thinking about your setting or something that is relevant to your story. And if you remember from my previous video, you don't want to start your story with a big long description of the setting. Where you describe your setting is when it becomes relevant to what is happening in the story. So if you're going to personify, say, the storm in a story, or the rain or the wind or whatever it is, that's only because that storm is impacting the action of the story. If you're going to personify, like my other example here, an object like a doll, it's only going to be personified because that doll becomes relevant to the action of the story. So the first thing that you're going to do is think about the different things that you've thought that you might like to include as an element in your story and choose out a standout feature of the setting or an object, standout feature of an object, and then think about what human attribute best suits the mood and atmosphere that you're going for. And remember, on my previous videos we've talked about, is your story going to be a fun, chill vibe? Is it going to be something where it's scary and ominous? Whatever the mood is or atmosphere that you're trying to create, you are going to personify to match that. Okay, so for example, as someone that lives in a seaside town, you're not going to say laughing seagulls. If something is terrible is about to happen, you would come up with a different synonym which would make it more sinister. All right, now let's think about those human attributes. So there are lots of different ways that you can create human attributes for your setting or your object. You could talk about things that are movement related. So here we've got dancing sunlight. You could talk about emotions or intentions, the rain pushed up the hill with angry flashes of cold. You could talk about actions, the branch slapped her as she passed, that should say. You could talk about the speech or the noise that you hear with humans. So in the tree, 3 crows cackled. So you are thinking about what is the standout feature that you're going to personify, what is the mood that you want to create, and then what action best suits that mood, and you're going to choose one of these and you're just going to kind of stick with that as being your piece of personification that you can use, and that should work really well because you've thought about it in advance. All right, let's have a look at similes. So again, similes is something that we know really, really well. It's one of the very first techniques that we learn when we're doing story writing when we're younger. As a result of that, we can often limit our similes to being things that are a little bit basic. So here we've got a description of a tsunami. So it became a wall of water as high as a 4-story building. And in a lot of ways that one works really nicely because it is giving the reader a reference for the size, 4 stories, but also that sense that because they relate it to a building, that sense of solidity, that destructive nature that this wave is going to have. Like personification, you need to think really carefully about how you're going to write your similes so that they aren't basic. If that's just as red as a fire engine or as fast as a jaguar, you are going to be limited on the marks that you're going to get because those are, let's be honest, very primary school. So again, for your similes, we're going to think about a standout feature of a person in your story, and it has to be relevant to the story. So for example, if in the story you've got something that happens at night time and it's pitch black, but one of the people in your group has got very, very, very white blonde hair and it would be obvious, you could still see it at night time, then that standout story can become, that standout feature can become relevant to the story. Okay, you could also choose a standout feature of an event or an action that's happening. And then again, like we talked about with personification, you are going to create your simile around the atmosphere that you want to make. There are all sorts of ways of constructing similes. One of my favourite ways of constructing similes is to actually turn it into a compound word where you have got, instead of, you know, like a fire burning, you've got something like, and so I've got some examples here: a ghost-like mist, a prison-like classroom, teacher with squid-like arms, cheetah-like escape, something a little bit more interesting in that type of simile. Again, just like I said with personification, it's super important that you think this through and that you plan some that you can use. All right, our last one is allusion. And we are choosing this one especially for your examiners. Your examiners are going to be current English teachers, recently retired English teachers. And so allusion is something that you can do that is very satisfying for your readership. So allusion is a direct reference to a very famous person, event, piece of culture. So for example, Christy didn't like to spend money. She was no Scrooge, but she seldom purchased anything except the bare necessities. So what sorts of things can you allude to? So again, you're going to want to think about what it is that you are going to want to do as part of your allusion. And so this is again going to be a standout feature. It will often be in reference to a person or a situation or action that is happening. So you can use it, a character, an event, or the way that something happens. And then you want to be choosing something mega famous. And so my reference for this is just that if most people in the street will have heard of it, then you can go for it. If only you and some of your friends know about it, then the chances are that the examiner is not going to necessarily get it. So here we've got Spider-Man. He sticks to that group like Spider-Man sticks to the building. There we go. We've got a simile and an allusion there. All right, so as your examiner is likely to be an English teacher, some of the things that you can allude to are the texts that you've studied. So, and again, if you've watched my other video, you'll know that we've talked about strong internal character voice. This helps with it. So, he was ambitious, like Macbeth, not in a good way. Mrs. E went all Jekyll and Hyde on us today. Going on strike didn't work out for Eva, it ain't going to work out for you. All right, so you've got allusions to some of the texts that you've studied. Then you've got some allusions to like super famous, films, books, TVs, art, pop references. So we've got Hermione Granger here. We've literally got some lyrics. Haters are gonna hate no matter what I do. He's no Shakespeare, that's for sure. Did you see what happened in the playground? Ben went all Rambo on James. So we've got those references to cultural things that would make sense to your reader. And then super important events in world history, and there's a slight caveat with that, which I'm sure you can guess what it is, but the example here is that this is a disaster of titanic proportions. All right, when you're doing references to world history, you want to avoid any references to the terrible things that happen in our world history that are still areas of sensitivity. So we are not going to reference any form of terrorist attacks, 9/11, anything like that. We are not referencing the Holocaust or some of the devastations that have happened in World War I, World War II, or wars since then. You are referencing things that are generally really well heard of. So we could talk about the Egyptian pyramids. We could talk about, you know, going around the world, you know, all of those sorts of things, but not things that are sensitive in our shared world history. All right, so just a very quick reminder as we get to the end, you do need to use some techniques. You don't need to use lots of them. 1 or 2 well-placed techniques is better than 50 rubbish similes. So think about that as part of your planning before the exam.